In my world, we talk a lot about safety, and sometimes to the point that it frustrates me a little bit. This gets into our larger conversation because it sounds like, with safety being the priority, that any kind of suffering is problematic. And I actually think suffering in the context of safety is transformational.
Hi, I'm Jim Harrington, and this is the Leader's Journey podcast. So today I have the great privilege of having Dr. Chuck DeGroat as my guest on this podcast. Chuck is a pastor, a therapist, a seminary professor, a spiritual director, a trauma specialist, and author. I could go on and on. He's a general, all-around amazing human being, and I'm really privileged to call him my friend. Chuck's a licensed counselor and is ordained in the Reformed Church in America. I could spend a lot of time introducing you, Chuck, because there's just so much. You've got books including Leaving Egypt, The Toughest People to Love, Wholeheartedness. What was my favorite, When Narcissism Comes to Church, until your last one, Healing from Within, came in, and now Healing Was Within became my favorite. To my listeners, Chuck is one of the top 5 people who I look to as a thought leader. Chuck, I really can't adequately express the level of appreciation and respect that I have for you. You integrate research from the world of theology, psychology, and neurosciences. And just almost every time that you write or speak, I feel like my world is enlarged and my capacity as a leader is helped. And so I'm really glad to have you here today. Welcome.
Yeah. Well, I think the feeling is mutual, and look to you. I think there are a lot of us actually, Jim, who look to you as one of those top 3 thought leaders who shape the way we think about everything from politics to church stuff to our own inner lives. And so it's, I told you before we started, I just kind of imagine you and I sitting in a pub when we have these conversations. Yeah.
Wouldn't it be fun if we could actually sit in a pub one day?
Yeah, that'd be
a lot of fun. Well, as you know, we do these podcasts and we almost always try to have a simple but complex leadership principle.
Yeah.
Here's what I want to try on for today. Effective leadership challenges with care. Growth requires challenge. Flourishing requires care. Mature leaders resist the 2 extremes, protecting people from all discomfort and pushing people beyond what they can healthily bear. I look back on my life and can see that the major trajectory-changing experiences were usually very painful for me. My son is a business coach, and he had a podcast for a while, and I was the very first guest that he had on, which I was really honored by. And we had a topic we were going to talk about, but before we were online, we were recording, and he said, before we get to the topic we want to talk about today, you're the most seasoned leader that I have a personal relationship with. And I wonder what you'd say to my listeners about learning to be a leader. And I said, I wasn't prepared for that question. Let me think. And then I said, well, they're not going to like what I have to say because I would probably say that almost everything that I learned about being an effective leader was a really painful experience for me. And very few people wake up in the morning and say, ooh, I want some of that.
Yeah.
But you often hear me quote Edwin Friedman, who says, if you want to increase your emotional intelligence, you've got to increase your pain tolerance. And then I read your Substack entitled When Character Conflicts with Power, which I've shared over and over again. And it gave me pause. It made me, I began to wonder, maybe we could start today with the question, how does a leader discern the difference between pain that forms us in a positive way and pain that harms us? Or I'm wondering, is that even a good framing of a question to begin with?
Yeah, I think that's as helpful a framing to jump in with as there might be, because it's true. There's pain that tends to harm us, pain that leads to wounds that can last a lifetime. And there does seem to be a kind of pain that leads to transformation. I think of you and I both like Richard Rohr's work and how he talks about necessary humiliations, to look for humiliations even daily. And I'm constantly aware of the kind of minor humiliations, micro humiliations. Is that a word? But that I'll experience on a daily basis, where I'll miss a cue in a conversation, or I'll miss an appointment, or I'll fail to respond to an email, or I'll respond to an email too harshly, or whatever it might be, right? And there's something about that that if I'm able to metabolize that, and this could be a much longer conversation, right? Because people are wondering, well, what does he mean by that?
That's what I was going to
Uh,
ask.
yeah, right. If I can digest that, if I can sit with that, if I
Process
can
it.
process
Mhm.
it at some level, if I can make connections, perhaps to my own story, there's a lot that we could go into there. It might become something transformative. But I think the one other thing I'd say is that uh, there's one thing that we know as sort of a matter of autonomic nervous system fact, and that's that pain that is unaccompanied leads to trauma. But pain that is accompanied generally tends to lead to some kind of transformation. In other words, if you're going through something really hard and you've got someone to sit with, someone to
Yeah.
connect to in the midst of it, you've got a fighting chance to avoid the kind of trauma that sets in and debilitates you, right? But if you go solo, well, then you do run the risk of that pain sort of finding its way inside and sitting there and coming out sideways in the future.
So, for those of us like the two of us who are in the world of helping to train leaders, how do you help them? How do you personally help them? You know, on the one end, there's the I'm not going to talk about my trauma, and on the other
Mm.
end, there's cowboy up and get it done, right? How do you like? It seems like there's got to be some middle ground there, and how do you avoid getting in the ditch on one side of the road or the other?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I think I've learned from you that it begins with our own groundedness, right? It begins with our own sense of differentiation. So I need to do whatever work that I need to do so that I don't become enmeshed at some level with my clients or people that I'm working with, or on the other hand, pull away or distance myself. So, so that's work that I need to do. And you and I as leaders, we need to be aware of the impact of people on us. That conversations are not neutral, relationships are not neutral. And so when I'm sitting with someone, I'm paying attention, at, throughout my time with a person to what's happening within me. Um, but I think for transformation to happen, there's got to be a growing sense of safety and trust. And we could talk a little bit more about this. In my world, we talk a lot about safety, and sometimes to the point that it frustrates me a little bit. This gets into our larger
Right.
conversation because it sounds like, with safety being the priority, that any kind of suffering is problematic. And I actually think suffering in the context of safety is
I love
transformational.
that.
And so that's a bit of what I write about in that little piece.
I love that. I have a client, I have several clients down in Australia, and one of them that I was talking to recently was in a really hard place where she was suffering at the hands of somebody she was describing it as spiritual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And we were having the very conversation that you and I are having, and a part of what I said to her was so where we started in the conversation was wondering about what it means when the scripture says that Jesus learned obedience through suffering.
Hmm.
And so, on the one hand, like we're not called to avoid suffering, there has to be some redemptive process there. We talked
Yeah.
about that a little bit, and then I was able to say to her, "Look, uh, I'm not in your shoes. I'm not experiencing what you're experiencing. I don't think you have to I think if you want to set this aside, you can do that.
Hmm.
Uh, if you don't want to, there's going to be suffering involved. I think there may be suffering involved either way.
Yeah.
If you want to deal with it, I'm willing to walk with you. I'm willing to sit with you. I'm willing to pray for you and support you as you do this work. But what I was attempting to do was to, on the one hand, name the suffering, and on the other hand, put it in her hands. What she does
Uh-huh.
with that.
Uh-huh. Yeah. 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 It's very similar when I encounter situations like that. And the way I like to think about it is that it would be malpractice on my part to tell someone who is in a relationship like that, where they might feel unsafe and who themselves are living in a very sort of activated state,
Right.
to stay, because in order to do whatever work they need to do within the relationship, let alone personally, they'll need some space. It's not boundary for the sake of boundary. It's a
Right.
boundary for the sake of them doing
Totally.
the work of getting to a more grounded place, more safe place, and becoming someone who can live within their window of tolerance, becoming someone who can re-engage in a differentiated way. But I think you and I have both encountered, thinking of women in relationships that are maybe painful, potentially even abusive, who are incredibly grounded, incredibly differentiated, and choose to stay. There's that sense of agency. Like I'm going to stay. I know it's hard,
Right.
and there are a whole lot of qualifications, obviously, that I could make,
Yeah,
to this,
sure.
but uh, that that when I have a sense that their yes is coming from a deep and grounded yes,
Yes.
this is what I want to do,
Yeah.
then I realize there's something here that is uniquely resilient about this person that doesn't happen overnight. There's a maturity there, right? There's an emotional health there.
And so when somebody like this woman says, "No, I want to stay the course. I want to do the work."
Yeah.
Um, what do you say to clients? How do you help a client find the kind of support and accountability and encouragement, all the things that are needed in order to, well, like when they walk away from you, they could sit in your office all day long, they'd get all that, but
Yeah.
when they walk away from you, what kind of counsel do you give to them or encourage them to do to stay the course?
Yeah, I mean, there are a whole host of things, and they're generally my focus is generally relational,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
It's not simply about saying, "Here's a good book to read." It's about who do you have in your life? I One of the things that I think you know this, I've got a new book on character formation
Of
coming out
course,
in
I want you
October,
to
and
talk
I've
about
got a
it.
whole yeah, there's a whole section where I talk about ancient initiatory traditions where there's a writer that I discovered years and years ago when I was doing my doctoral work, who talked about four conditions for what he would call sacred suffering, and that's safety, a sense of safety, like in other words, a place of groundedness, like we were talking about
Hmm.
earlier, an elder, which is to say someone in your life who has walked a little bit further than you, community, that might be someone at your level that you can just simply talk to and process with, like an AA community or something like that. And then he says a sacred story that makes sense of suffering. Um,
Wow.
like in the Christian tradition, that would be a way of telling the biblical story that doesn't dismiss suffering or valorize suffering, but sees it as transformative, right? And what I begin to think about, what does that look like for that unique person,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And there's not a plug and play there.
Right.
There's a lot of wisdom, discernment in the process.
I love that. I can hardly wait to see your book.
Mm.
Those four pieces seem comprehensive and as you said, not a cookie cutter. You'll have to help people they'll have to figure out at their particular
Yep,
context
that's
where
right.
that happens. That's really I'm going to use that over and over again. So let's turn the tables and let's turn a little bit different direction. There seems to me to be so much cultural emphasis on emotional safety that it almost seems
Mhm.
like it's unintentionally lowered our capacity for discomfort, conflict, disappointment, criticism.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see mostly on social media where somebody has just directly disagreed with me. They've said it directly, they've said it clearly, they haven't raised their voice or yelled. They've just said, I see this differently than you do. And the person on the receiving end of that says that they've been abused. That this abusive person has, done this to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
What would you say about about the impact of all that in leadership development and the work that we do?
I mean, I'd say that someone who's reacting like that or responding like that does not know safety, right? At an autonomic level, because what safety grows in us is our capacity to engage hard conversations
Right.
like that, right? To disagree, to be in conflict, to rupture, even, right? So safety doesn't lead to, I'll hear people say it leads to weakness, right? Fragility. I actually think that a grounded sense of safety, like we're talking about, I often go to Ephesians 3, being rooted and grounded in love.
Mhm.
That when you operate out of that place, and I think about this in terms of the autonomic nervous system, right? And work that needs to be done for us to grow what we call our window of tolerance. Um, from that place, well, there's often profound courage to enter into hard and challenging things, right? And there's no sense of hypersensitivity or fragility. So it's what's interesting is that there's an article out right now that I largely agree with on the perils of therapeutic culture. And I'm a
Oh,
therapist,
right.
and I started a counseling program, but I think this is one of the perils of therapeutic cultures. What you end up with is, systems. You and I have both done consulting within systems where, the a small subset of a staff, they're particularly sensitive or dramatic or captures the attention of the entire staff and the leader, and everything is sort of everyone tiptoes around that person. So I think, yeah, I'd kind of want to reframe safety in a way that leads to uh, profound resilience and not weakness or
Yeah,
sensitivity or yeah.
that's good. Yeah, I grew up in a world where it would be that's exactly how it would have been framed, and so
Mhm.
it'd be framed as weakness, and consequently, then you didn't have options to be able to do the
Yeah.
work you're describing. There's been
Yeah.
a lot of new information in the last decade that has come out about our autonomic nervous systems, about how to
Mhm.
what that is, about how to manage that, about the importance of managing that.
Yeah.
For our listeners who hear you say that and talk about the importance of doing that work,
Yeah.
say more about that. What is that work? Like if you're just coaching somebody, saying here's two or three or
Yeah.
four things that you ought to be talking to somebody about or working on, what would you say?
Yeah. Well, I just say in a nutshell that you were created for Eden, which is to say you were created for relationship, for harmony, for peace, for connection, for communion, and you live east of Eden. Now, the autonomic reality of that is that you you were designed with a nervous system that at its very center has a system that that facilitates connection, facilitates play, facilitates creativity. We call it the ventral vagal
Hmm.
system. I call it home. It's a center of connection, creativity, compassion, play, delight, all the good things. And too many of us live disconnected from this built-in center of joy, safety, of connection and communion.
When you
We live. Go
when
ahead.
you use that description, what immediately came to mind for me was me and five or six of my family members sitting around the table playing cards, laughing,
Mhm.
enjoying one another's company.
Yeah.
That's the image that came up for me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. And it's really important in my work when I talk to people who are in crisis or have experienced lots of trauma. It's important for them to find their way to some felt sense of this. Everyone has a memory of it. Maybe it goes back to 5 years old when you're riding bikes with your best friend, the wind
Mhm.
in your hair, and you felt free. A lot of us, though, live on the hamster wheel of on the one hand, our sympathetic nervous system, what I call sympathetic storm, which is an activated nervous system, a protected nervous system. You've heard of fight or flight, but there's also fawn, a more pleasing and
Mhm.
appeasing way of engaging the world. And, lots of folks that I work with, and I'm sure you too, live in perpetual sympathetic storm. That's the only reality they know. They live self
Right.
protected. When you live in that state, it's really hard to connect. It's really hard to listen. It's challenging to be curious. Everything's a fight. Everything's oppositional. Everything's reactive, right?
Mhm.
Because you're living in a nervous system state of self-protection. And so I have a lot of empathy for folks like
Right.
this. There's a part of me that just wants to say, stop being so reactive. But in a sense, there's a story behind that. There's a
Right.
survival story there. Like I need to be like this because I grew up in a family where I experienced threat, right? So my hope would be there's more I could say about this, so I'm simplifying things. My hope would be that there could be a shift over time from this state of storm, sympathetic storm of reactivity to a state of safety, of connection, from there, as that window of tolerance grows within us, well, all sorts of things are possible. We can move toward others with more courage. Our leadership is more secure. We'll experience critique or challenges, but they won't go to the level of our our being, and we'll be able to interact with curiosity because it won't feel like a threat. That's what I want to see grow in leaders, that kind of ventral connection, that kind of resilience.
I can look back on my own life, and I had both of those, but two kinds of leaders. I had the leaders who, when I would be in a storm, and I grew up with trauma in my life, as you know, and when I would be acting out of that, there would be some version of get over yourself, stop doing that, some judgmental, shameful, aggressive thing. And then I had some really amazing leaders in my life who, in the moment of that, actually reflected back to me what they thought I must be experiencing. I can see that you're really scared right now, or I can tell that you're really angry, and in a very calm and kind of non-judgmental way. And can see how the judgmental response, which is just so common, really makes matters worse, keeps things going the direction they're going. But it was trajectory change. Those few relationships that I had along the way with pastoral leaders who did that was really trajectory changing for me, and became the kind of the ground in which my own autonomic nervous system began to find space for play and rest and ground.
Yeah. I mean, so it happened relationally.
Right, exactly.
Right? And I think that's really important. I think when we experience people who see us and they don't replay the trauma in our lives, they show up differently. They show up with kindness in their eyes, with honesty, the kind of honesty to say, here's how I experience you. But I think that's transformational.
Yeah. So I do believe that Edwin Friedman was mostly right when he said, if you're going to increase your pain tolerance, if you're going to increase your emotional maturity, you've got to increase your pain tolerance in the context of what we're talking about, or how we're talking about doing that. So often what I experience with people is, just because of the nature of education and the way learning takes place in our culture, is like, okay, I want to do that. Tell me in 3 easy steps, what's the down and dirty, easy way? Can I take a course? At the end of the course, I'll be transformed. And
which is the opposite of what Friedman was saying, right?
Exactly. I more than ever, I did some work this past week, and I gave a recording of the work to Chat GPT and asked it to critique me. And one of the things that it said was that your weakness may be that you believe too much in the possibility of human transformation. And I thought, that's a weakness I'm actually pretty proud of. But I wonder, I think one of the ways we could land the plane here today would be to ask the question for a listener who hears this and who wants to grow their pain tolerance. What I want to say is, in the frame of a long journey, what are the 2 or 3 or 5 like fundamental, and maybe it's the same thing we've been saying, but if it is repeated, what is the, I want to grow my pain tolerance. I hear what Jim is saying. I hear what Friedman is saying. I believe that's right. And I'm just not sure how to get there.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about what it isn't first. Okay. It's not avoiding your pain, right? So, I think that's a common sort of cultural perspective, to bypass your pain in one way or another. We do that in all sorts of ways. We numb, we avoid, and so we compartmentalize, and all the things. We're the Christian church is really good about that. We've done that with our history as well, right? So, I think the other is to simply say, well, you just have to go to your pain and just feel it all the way through, and just kind of take it on. It's sort of like what they do, exposure therapy, what they do when people have some sort of panic, you're afraid of snakes. We're just going to put a snake on your lap. And what we've discovered, like I've been a part of it, what
is being discovered,
smart people have discovered, is that that's not how growth happens. Our exposure to pain needs to be titrated, which is to say it needs to happen at a pace that we can handle, not too fast, not too slow. and that exposure has to happen within, well, as we talked about, a safe relationship. And so, I try to create a space for people uh, where they can move toward their pain, but not too fast,
Right.
right? Not too slow, but not too
Yes.
fast. And that's really tricky. That takes
Right.
wisdom. Sometimes we do go a little bit too fast, and it's can be kind of re-traumatizing, and sometimes we go a little too slow because I'm scared
Yeah.
and I don't want to go there. And it's me, and I've got to kind of be honest about my own fear working with this particular person.
Yeah. The moving towards your pain is such a counterintuitive but very powerful uh,
Hmm.
thing. When I in the youngest years of my adult life, I was a house church pastor of folks who are in recovery, and I was learning about trauma, and I made the huge mistake of trying to move a guy toward his trauma too quickly, and
Yeah.
it was really devastating for him. It was really
Yes.
painful for
Yeah.
me to watch the impact of all that.
Hmm.
And I got him connected to some people who actually helped him, with the harm that I had caused. Uh, and I do find, like, part of what I love about coaching is that I almost always try to end with some action. So
Hmm.
we've been talking about this today, and here's what I've heard you say. And what would you think about? First, I'll ask, do you see some opening for action? And then sometimes I'll say, so what if between now and the next time we talk, you did this, and whatever this was is a step, a baby step toward the uh, toward the pain.
Yeah.
And mostly people give feedback that that's useful, that it helps them
Yeah.
not to just stay frozen
Yeah.
or stuck.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and then I think the other thing that's really powerful, I know you do this too, we use the information practice reflection cycle. So we get some information about your pain, and then you go practice. You kind of move toward that just a little bit, and then you come back
Yeah.
and reflect on that. And
Yes.
in my own personal journey, the reflecting on the painful experience, not the trauma of the past, but the homework I was doing in the moment, where I was having to
Yeah.
increase my pain tolerance a little bit. The reflection on that experience was liberating for me in some really important ways.
Mm.
Not in the moment, but when I look
Yeah.
back over time, I think that's the thing that was most helpful, most useful to me in the process was
Yeah.
seeing, like it's like, as Trisha would say, getting up on the on the balcony and watching myself
Yeah.
and seeing that, oh, I did that, and I'm okay. I didn't get hit or shot or killed. I'm
Yeah.
okay, and I'm here now talking to my coach about that today, and that
Yeah.
increased my confidence in my ability to be able to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah. It's like we just come full circle because it feels like you're defining metabolizing. This is the processing, this is the
Yeah.
metabolizing, because every time you go through that cycle, it feels like maybe you get a little bit more clear of some of those inner obstacles, some of those defenses, some of those fears that keep us from growing.
I do,
That's
I
good.
do find that helping people manage expectations about how long the process is. One of my
Yeah.
favorite sayings is the gap between expectation and reality is almost always filled with anxiety. And if I think I'm going to do
Mhm.
3 coaching sessions or 6 and this is going to be done, or I'm going to read a book or take a class,
Mhm.
so I'm pretty regularly saying to people, this is a lifelong process. I'm working on some
Yeah.
stuff today as a 73-year-old that my very first therapist said, there's 2 or 3 things that impact all of us. Like he had 2 or 3 things, I had 2 or 3 different things, and the 2 or 3 things that I had in my 20s and my 30s and like every decade or 15 years, it was like, okay, I've done the work
Yeah.
up to this point, but now life has become more complicated and more emotionally charged. And there's another level of work to do. I was just yesterday in a conversation. We're doing some work with it. We have several corporate clients, both in the business and in the not-for-profit world, and we got connected to a for-profit company that kind of had a train wreck at the leadership level, and they called us in, and we've been real. They are saying, and we can see that we're being real helpful. But the most common thing that I run into with them in the one-on-one coaching, we're doing some group training and some one-on-one coaching. The most common thing that that I run into is that they want lots of patience for themselves, but they want the other people in the system to get fixed. Like, why does he keep doing that?
Right away.
Right? Why
Yeah.
does he keep doing that? What? Like, we've talked to him about that 3 times,
Yeah.
and so I think one of the roles that we play is helping to manage those expectations, both
Yeah.
individually and corporately, in a way
Yeah.
that allows some space for the work to be able to
Yeah.
take place.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm so with you, and I think we're both committed to this slow journey of transformation. And it's interesting to me that even in the therapeutic world that I tend to occupy a little bit more often, they're wanting to sidestep
Right.
some of that slow transformation,
Right.
and so it continues to be countercultural. People, people just like you were just describing, want that quick fix, or they want justice right away,
Right.
right?
Right.
And I do too. It's often my friends who are of color who tell me that
Totally.
the road to justice is a long one, right? So slow down,
Right.
Chuck, right? But
Right.
I think there's wisdom in slowing down. And I don't know, you've lived long enough, and I think at this point I've lived long enough to know that in our work with people, that's just it's measured in, well, months, but more like
Years.
years,
Yeah.
many
Yeah.
years, right?
Yeah.
So that's just the way it goes.
Yeah, what I would say is that the most transformational experience is to get some people in a community in your life for whom that know the language of transformation, that understand some of the things we've been talking about, that are practicing those in their real world and in their communal life. That's your best hope for all of that.
Yeah.
I could talk to you all day long. Uh,
Yeah.
Tell us about your new book.
Yeah, well, this is one that I'm really proud of and didn't expect to write, but it's been a growing sort of concern of mine that when I first got into this work in the late 90s, I was very hopeful that if people understood emotional health and they engaged practices of emotional health, that we'd all collectively grow and mature together.
Right.
And I think some of what I'm seeing is that and this is part of the critique even of therapeutic culture, is that it's actually leading to some degree to more polarization, more sensitivity, more fragility,
Mm.
perhaps, more reactivity. And so this is a book that pivots in the direction of character formation,
Yeah.
the long journey of character formation. What does that look like to become a person of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness? Um, and what's different about it, I think, is that lots of what I've seen on character formation is generally about moral development, and it comes off as quite legalistic.
Right.
And at least part of the book, maybe a full third, is about the autonomic conditions for character change. In other words, can people change when they're braced in sympathetic storm, like we were talking? Well,
Right.
no, they can't
Right.
actually. And so for someone to really shift, for character change to happen, for the kind of transformation to occur that we really want to see happen, we need to mind the conditions of character change. What are they? And then what's the process
Mm.
of character
Mm.
change? I talked about that. And it's that slow journey that we were just talking about that's often discovered in particular stages. And then I sort of rounded off by talking about in one sense, the telos of character change, faith, hope, and love. And so I'm excited about it. In some ways, it's a follow up to the narcissism
Right.
book.
Right.
Uh, the question that people ask me more often than any other question is, how do people change? How do narcissists change?
Yep.
So this is an attempt to answer that, but an attempt to answer the question, well, how do I change?
Right.
Too, right?
Right.
So,
I
yeah.
want to read to close out today. I want to read a paragraph from your podcast that's entitled "When Character Conflicts with Power." But at the very end, you have this segment that says the conditions for deep character change. In the
Yeah.
end, the way out of anxious self-protection is not more resolve, but deeper connection. Your body knows
Yeah.
this. It calms in the presence of secure love, steadies when it's seen, softens when it's held by something larger than your own effort. The Christian contemplative tradition taught this long before neuropsychology came along. This is the sacred ecosystem where character grows, where the spirit meets your nervous system, where belonging restores the possibility of transformation, where gentleness and patience begin to feel natural again. Wow, so powerful, so powerful. So if folks want to get in touch with you, how can they do that? Besides buying your
Yeah.
books?
Well, yeah. Well, over at Substack,
Right.
I'm doing, I don't know about you, I'm doing less and less on Twitter or X or whatever it's
Right,
called.
right. Threads. Yeah.
Over Facebook, Instagram. I've got a thing that I've started called the Soul Care Collaborative,
Mhm.
where I've got some fellow counselors and coaches who are doing some work too. So the soulcarecollaborative.com. So that's about it. Those places.
Good,
Yeah.
good. Well, it's as I said at the beginning, such an honor to have you on the call today. I do wish we could go
Yeah.
to a pub one day and actually have
Yeah.
more of this conversation, but
Yeah.
we'll put some of your contacts, some of the books and that kind of stuff in the
Yeah.
show notes, and
Yeah.
look forward to another conversation somewhere along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Jim.
To our listeners, leadersjourney.us is the place where you can find the kind of encouragement and support that we've been talking about here today. We have a team of about 13 or 14 coaches with a bio on all of them, and so you can look to see where there's a good fit for you, reach out to them, and we'd like to help you in this journey. For now, take good care. We'll see you soon.